Okay, hello and welcome to this video. Today I'll be walking you through creating a console application and editing the SQL Server objects through the Entity Framework. So the Entity Framework is a wonderful thing that Microsoft has recently made open source and is allowing us to interact with data objects in SQL Server or Oracle databases. In this case today we'll be looking at a SQL Server database and specifically one table. This table here, table institutions with key. The reason why I'm choosing to do the table institutions with key is that I need to have a primary key on that table in order for it to be editable within the Visual Studio environment through the Entity Framework. And over here I've got the code to generate the script that creates this table. So if you're going to be following along today, you might want to jot this down. I'll also include this in my blog post, so that way you can copy it off the blog as well. But we'll go ahead now, and the blog is fortunawpf.blogspot.com in case you're coming at this from YouTube, just so you're aware of that. And now we'll go ahead and re-enter Visual Studio and begin creating this project. So got two projects open there, so we'll go ahead and do File, New, Project, and we want to go to Visual C#, Console Application, create a name for our project. So I'll call this Sample Modifying Entity Console App, and say OK. And we should hopefully fairly quickly have our console application with nothing inside of it, right? We got this empty container basically with this program file. And the first thing we need to do is bring the Entity Framework objects in. So they've made this quite simple for us. We can right click and go to Add New Item and select the data object, the Entity Data Model. And we shall call this SQL or Sample SQL Entity Model. And I'll say Add. And it's going to prompt me for a database to get this information from. Or I could, of course, do a code first and other options here, but we're going to use that SQL database. So I'll go out and grab my connection string. And we'll paste that in to Visual Studio in a moment. And you can see it's actually created the string for me with the database, but that's not going to be your typical interaction with this. You're probably going to see this window instead. You need to paste your server in. Then you have to go down here and select the database that you want to pull the table from, which in my case is Sample SQL DB. Press OK. I'm going to rename this to Sample SQL Entity. You can name it to whatever you want. I'm just using what I was using previously when I did this demonstration, so that way I can follow my notes. So I'm targeting the Entity Framework 6.0. And you'll see that now that we've pointed at that database in SQL, it actually gives me access to all the objects. So I'm going to say table institutions with key is the object I want to have the entity wrap around, and I just left this name, the Sample SQL DB Model, as the name. And shortly we should see that table and all of the Entity Framework basically wrap around that table a series of classes. Those classes are going to allow us to do CRUD operations against SQL Server, and it's really, I think, kind of beautiful how fast and easy some of this is to work with. Like, I don't know what other backgrounds you're coming from, what things you've worked with, but this is, I think, done extremely well by Microsoft in terms of giving us a way to edit data. You can see that it does take a while when you point at these entity objects to finish, generating these code and stubs and everything, but they're doing a lot behind the scenes. So in addition to this EDMX file that came up here, where it shows our table, and we want to make sure again that this came in as a primary key, and it is in fact entity key true, so that's good. And we see the little key icon there letting us know that is in fact a unique identifier on that table, which is going to allow us to make the CRUD operations of insert, delete, making changes to it. Without that, we'd get a failure message in Visual Studio. So again, very important to have that key on there. And now we will go in and find out the name that we'd given our DB context. So if I click on this, I think we can see that. Looks like it's still kind of loading here for a minute, so we'll allow Visual Studio to think about whatever it's decided to think about here. Gotta be patient, I guess, right? So we have this file that was auto-generated for us, as it says at the top, and this DB context of sample SQL entity is going to be our path into working with the SQL object now that we're bringing in. So I begin with a using statement. Actually, it's not totally true. I guess I begin with the proper using statement up here. So I've got using. Oh, we've got system.link already listed, thread, data.entity, entity, system.data.entity, data, you know, see it obviously has the IntelliSense once I get this right, entity, so I'll put that up there, and then come down and begin doing my coding down here. So we've got using sample SQL entity, and I'm just going to call it my context because that's again the DB context that we're targeting, equals new sample SQL entity. So that gets us basically this place where now we can talk to that context and begin doing our insert, update, delete type statements. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a try block, and we'll have the code that we're essentially trying to add this new record. So we'll create a data type that is the table that we want to target, and you'll see that because we have that using block here, we're actually able to reference this type, and I'll call this my row because it's the row that I want to add to the table. New table, institutions with key. That was interesting. Don't like that. I didn't like that all that came in with it, so I'll just say table institutions with key. And okay, so one of the challenge, we're gonna have to have a catch block here too. It's prompting me for that, so I'll go ahead and just pop that in down here. And we're just gonna throw an exception. Throw the catch, the exception that we want to, exception E, and then we'll just throw that exception. Call it EX. Okay. So that should be what I want. Catch, throw. It seems like every time I try to say, oh, I've got a dot in there. That's funny. Huh, my bad. Okay. For those of you that don't know how to catch an error, make sure not to put an IntelliSense dot between throw and the exception you're trying to capture. Anyway, on with my my demo here. So I want to add a new record to this table, and I want to have the key value that comes in be unique and be the next one in sequence. So I'm going to call create a variable next value that I want to add to the table, and I'm going to say that's going to be equal to int, which is the data type of the institution ID field in SQL. So if we just go back and peek at that real quick, we'll see that we've got this institution ID field that's defined as an integer. So that's why I'm casting it at. We have very strong we have strong types, of course, in Visual Studio, and with strong types, you have to make sure you're casting things properly. So I'm just making sure that it's going to return this context, my context dot. Oh my gosh, let's just do this. My context. Should be a fun day here. Control Z. I'm not sure why I'm not getting IntelliSense on this. We definitely should be. Table with keys. Oh, I must have a. Look at that. It's always something simple when you see it, and it's going to be a semicolon there, and it didn't know what I was doing down here. So now I'll have my context available, and I think it's actually good maybe for you to see some of these mistakes as I make them, because there are things that you're likely to maybe have happen to you too. So you're right there with me, right, suffering through the the fun. So we'll go ahead and just put that in back on there for the type I want to cast it as, and we'll do table institutions with keys dot max, and we're going to find. These lambda expressions are great if you haven't seen them before, but it's basically allowing us to talk to that table. So now I'm going to see all the fields inside of there, and I'm finding the maximum institution ID. And then once I've found that, I want to go ahead and add 1 to it, and that's what our next value is going to get assigned to. So that way, you know, if it was in this case, we can see that maximum value we currently had for sort order was 9, and this then would return 10 as the new sort order. And I continue to click the other project. So go back here, and now we'll do my row dot, and we'll do institution ID equals next val, and then we'll do my row dot institution description equals car plus next val, and then we'll next need to find, I kind of have like debit amounts coming in, and I wanted to keep those consistent as increasing by 100 each time. So we'll go ahead and keep that going the same way by doing int next debit equals, and again we need to cast this type for the purpose of assigning it to that table, context institutions with keys. You can see how nice the IntelliSense in here is too when you've actually done your coding properly. C equals lambda expression again, C dot. And we're now looking at the fixed debit field. So I'm taking the current fixed debit amount, and I'm going to go ahead and add 100 to that. And if you haven't noticed, the application type that I'm modeling against is a checking ledger system. So this is part of the other project we showed in the previous videos on my blog, where we were trying to bring in the tables and then get a report working. So now we're kind of looking more at like the data side of it within the application itself. So my row, continuing on, dot, and we've got the fixed debit equals this new next debit, and then my row dot is fixed debit, that is going to equal true, and my row dot is fixed credit is going to equal false. And I'm actually using the space bar to autocomplete these lines once I get the selection that I want. So I'm using the arrow keys and the space bar to kind of navigate to the piece that I want. Dot, and I'm going to go ahead and select this time our is monthly bill, and I'm going to set that value to true. And then my row dot fixed credit, so this is the amount for the credit. Since it's not a fixed credit, that's going to be 0. And then my row dot balance should equal 0. Okay, and my sort order, that is going to be set to my context dot table institutions with key max C dot sort order, and then we're going to go ahead and just add 1 to that. Okay, so you can kind of see how all that works. And of course we can do it in one statement here versus the variables and then the assignment like I was doing above. And the next thing we want to do is just check to make sure that the number of fields and that they're all unique here, that they match up with the table. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And back in SQL Server I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we've definitely hit all the fields that we want to add. So the next step is to take those pieces, and we're going to go ahead and just add that to our table object. So we've got my row, or sorry, my context, I guess, dot table institutions with keys dot add. There's an add method, and we're going to add that new row. And then now everything we've done so far is in memory. It's not at all talked back to SQL Server, so this is all being done away from the server. So as your application is making these changes, the server isn't seeing them yet. It's this next line that actually commits to the server, and that is the save changes command. So you're going to see this a lot with the Entity Framework, where you need to execute that. And then we're going to want a way with our console application to know when we've completed this operation. So this next line is purely for basically giving us a way to know where the state of the application is at. And I can do write line WL for that, for like a quick way to get it to show up. And we'll do one record added to institution table. And so that what this is going to do is basically just going to prompt us, letting us know that that record was added. And then I'm going to do a console.readline. And what that statement's going to do is it's essentially going to tell the console application to wait until we hit the enter key to go on, and that'll allow us to see that record getting added in SQL. So, you know, it's possible that I could just go in right now to show you how that works, but I think what I want to do is actually want to continue on with the rest of my operations that I want to do, and show you the next, maybe a new next way to interact with SQL Server. And so what that's going to be is to, essentially we're going to go across all of the rows in our table, and we're going to attempt to make a change to them. So I'm going to have a record count variable, and record count, and I'm going to initialize that to be 0, and then, which it doesn't like here, it's probably going to want that to be there, although I do want it to be in the context. Sorry, so give me a moment here as I define this. Oh, it's just not used, sorry, it's totally fine where I had it. It's kind of funny. You ever get nervous about something that isn't a problem? So what Visual Studio does by default is going to give you that green underline on a variable that you haven't used anywhere in your code yet. And I was resolving that in my mind right now as I do the video, probably due to nerves or something, as being an error, but of course it isn't an error. It's just letting us know that we haven't used it, and the green is there to tell us that. So if I like hover over it, it would say this variable is assigned but never used, but that's fine. I just haven't used it yet in our code, so we'll be doing that shortly. So now I'm going to make a list of this table object, and I'm going to name that list my table list, and I'm going to set that equal to my context dot table institutions with keys. And I'm going to order these items by their sort order, so that I know for sure that they're all coming in order. And I put that to a list. And now that I have that object available, I'm going to do for each, and you can actually hit the tab key twice at the end of this to pre-generate a stub for your loop. And my collection is going to be this guy, so I'll put that in where I have collection. And then int new sort order. Sort order is going to equal the int of my context dot table institutions with keys dot single, and again we use our lambda expression, c dot institution ID, where it's equal to the item that we're currently, so we've got these items in our collection, the current item coming in, we want it to be equal to that item's institution ID. And you can kind of see how nice this is to work with. If you've done other data manipulations in other environments before, this Identity Framework stuff is really, really nice. And then at the end of that, I will go ahead and grab back the sort order, and we're going to add 1 to it. So essentially we're finding the current items sort order and just adding 1, that single value. But we haven't actually assigned that to the value, to the in-memory object yet. We've just created this variable to store that value. So now I'll do my context dot table institutions with keys single. So now I'm identifying the record that I want to change. See that institution ID item dot institution ID. And if there's probably a faster way to write the syntax here. Maybe just like 1 statement instead of these 2 statements, but I thought maybe for the purpose of education, or like just helping you guys follow along, we'd break it up into 2. So I create the, just like we did up above, I create a variable first, and then I assign the variable. So, and that, so everything's happened except for what don't I have yet? I don't have the save changes. So context, my context rather, dot save changes, and that will then commit back to the server. And then we're going to want to go ahead and say console.writeLine, which I like to use the .wl like I showed you earlier to get the writeLine method, and then go ahead and write down what we want to say. So updated, and we'll say the record count, which we need to actually store then, right? So I'll go ahead and add that here, record count. And there's this fun syntax in C#+, which if you're coming from other languages, it's essentially the same as saying record count. In my Access programming I do at work sometimes, equals record count plus 1. These are synonymous. Basically, you're just saying I want to add 1 each time through to that. So it's just a fun way to write that, I guess, the plus there. So incrementing the variable, decrementing as the minus will be decrementing. So, and we'll say plus records. So now we know how many records we've affected, and we'll be able to see in SQL Server what those records were. And then again, we want to do our console readline statement out here. So we'll have console.readline. And then the next piece is going to be essentially this exact same piece we just added, except it's going to be subtracting one from this order to essentially put it back to what it was. So I can take all of this, this right here, paste it, and then just change this to be a minus instead. And then of course we'd be saying something different about what we're doing, right? We'd say we restored the record, so I can go ahead and just update our write line statement to be, you know, restored however many records in the table. This table list already exists, so can probably just rather than redeclaring it again, I can just go ahead and say my table list dot move dot sort, and we can just actually, I don't think I even do anything with it. I can just loop through it again. I think it'll be fine, actually. It's already in order. It's not going to have a... I was thinking, it's my record set mentality. It has me thinking something might go wrong there. We don't need this variable to get defined again. Before I was using different using blocks, but in this particular demo I'm showing you guys right now, I'm keeping it all inside of one using block, so we have the same context getting used throughout, versus opening and closing it with different instances. But that will take us into the last piece, where we'll be attempting to delete a row. So now we want to basically find some value, some institution ID that we want to delete. So we'll do int max ID, because the goal of what I've just done with all these CRUD operations is to essentially take us right back to the point where the database would be in the exact same state it was before all of the changes. So, and we'll see that as I show you this demo in a minute. I'm going to find the max, and get our lambda expression, see that, institution ID, I'm going to find the max one, and then we're going to go ahead and say table institutions with key, row to be deleted, maybe lowercase on that, and again we get our message letting us know that that's not used anywhere currently, which is the green squigglies on there, no worries, right? And we'll say equals my context, sorry, got a little ahead of myself, equals new table institution with key. So we got this variable available just like we did before. And then row to be deleted equals context, my context. You can tell that in my other samples I was using the word context by itself, but that single, and we want to again find where it equals that value we just found. Institution ID is equal to the max ID that I created. So I will, okay, so we're grabbing the institution ID where it equals that max value. And once we have that row that we found that we want to delete, we can simply say my context dot table institutions with key, and there's a remove command, and we'll go ahead and remove that row to be deleted. So pretty simple. And then if you've been following along with the previous examples, the next piece we need to do, of course, is my context dot save changes, which will commit the changes we made back to the database. And now that we've done that, we'll want to lastly say what we did, some kind of message back to the user, and we'll have this line to communicate that back to them, and then another read line. So let's go ahead and build our application to see if it builds successfully, which hopefully it will. Still building. And I'm gonna go ahead and pause while this builds. Oh, never mind, here we go. So I'll say yes to all. Good, build's done, good, I have to wait longer, good stuff. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna look back at SQL Server, observe our table. Again, we have a 9th record right here, and I'm gonna go ahead and run this to show you that the record isn't currently there. Then we're gonna go back into Visual Studio, run this program, and the first thing it's gonna tell us is that a record has been added, hopefully. One record added to the institution table. So now we're going to go back to SQL Server and kind of work with these two windows together. So it says the record's been added, and we see the record 9 with 8 showing up. I hit run, and sure enough, our 10th record is now there. Then the next thing we said to do is to update that sort order. So it says updated 10 records. I run this, and we see all of our sort orders updated from sequential from 1 to sequential from 2, so 2, 3, 4. They all incremented 1 like we expected them to. Then the next thing it was going to do is re-update those records to what they were previously. And we can actually see a problem there. Did you notice that record count was returned as 20? We can fix that in our application. So we'll do that when we're done here, and then we'll run it one more time just so you can see that that shows up properly. But you notice now that the sort order has been restored. And lastly, we're going to delete this row. So I'm just hitting enter to again, the read line was waiting for us to hit enter. So as I hit enter, it executes the next command. Most recently added item has been deleted. And I run this, and we see that the item is no longer there. And then now we do our debugging, right? Because we have this error where our record count continued to increment. And that was because between the two procedures, I didn't restore it. So we're going to want to just reset that. So the record got added, we incremented our values, and then before this part here, I'm just going to want to set that value back to 0. So we incremented it, oh sorry, not quite there. Yeah, that's updated that many records. So yeah, that's not going to work, sorry. That would be the wrong place, because that would be after I did it for when we're restoring it, right, with the -1, so I'd want to do it right here. So there we go. So if I play this again, we'll see it come up. Again, we go back to SQL Server, record gets added, and I'll hit enter. We'll see 10 records, and these guys, of course, got affected. Enter, back to 10 records and no longer 20. So yeah, good stuff. And then that's been deleted, so that record goes away, back down to original 8. And it's kind of a nice sample because it actually takes you back to how it was originally. That's pretty much what I had for you in terms of these CRUD operations and the entity framework. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that it helps you have success when interacting with the entity framework. Have a good day.